It was a quiet morning in the small town of Kingston, nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the town's sleepy streets. John Walker, a 71-year-old black man, was making his way through the parking lot of the local gas station, his hands steady as he pumped gas into his old pickup truck. His tired eyes scanned the horizon, the weight of his past years heavy on his shoulders. His mind often wandered back to the days when he was a young soldier, fighting a war on foreign soil. But today, John wasn't a soldier. Today, he was just a man who had survived battles, not only on the battlefield, but on the streets of his own country, and today, he was about to face an unexpected battle once again. As he finished fueling his truck, he caught sight of a police cruiser pulling into the station. The vehicle came to a stop near the entrance, and the young officer behind the wheel, Officer Ryan Clark, stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with a firm thud. Officer Clark was tall, around 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and an air of arrogance that could only come from someone who felt untouchable in his uniform. He was in his mid-20s, fresh from the academy, eager to make his mark. And yet, his demeanor suggested he hadn't yet learned the full weight of his badge. John didn't think much of it at first. He had lived long enough to know that being an older black man in a small town meant that his mere presence sometimes raised suspicion. But he had long grown used to that. He simply kept his head down and moved on with his day, just like he had for years. As John finished locking the gas cap, he heard the crunch of gravel behind him. Turning around, he saw Officer Clark striding toward him with purpose. "Excuse me, sir," Clark said, his tone sharp, almost condescending. "You're parked a bit too close to the pump. Could you move the truck back a little?" John blinked in surprise. It was a simple request, but something about the officer's tone rubbed him the wrong way. He had parked where everyone else did, away from the main traffic flow, out of anyone's way. But there was no reason to get upset. Still, John kept his voice calm, a habit he'd perfected over the years of dealing with unwanted scrutiny. "I was just finishing up, officer. No harm done." Clark didn't let it go. "I'm not asking, I'm telling," he said, stepping closer. "You need to move it now, or I'll have to issue a citation." John straightened his back. He wasn't going to back down this time, not when his dignity was at stake. The years of being underestimated, the silent battles he fought just to be seen, had hardened him, made him sharper than people gave him credit for. It wasn't just about a truck or a parking spot. It was about respect, and respect was something Clark wasn't offering. "I said I'm finishing up, officer," John repeated, his voice firm. "There's no need for any citations." The officer's eyes narrowed, scanning John with a look that suggested he was more than just irritated. There was a subtle shift in his posture, something almost predatory. Clark's sense of authority seemed to grow with each passing second. "You really think you can just ignore a direct order from an officer? You don't get to do that around here, old man." John's heart began to race, but he didn't flinch. He had been in far worse situations. Vietnam was a lifetime ago, but it still lived in his veins. He could feel his pulse steady itself, his breath slow. He had been shot at, ambushed, and broken. This moment, this was nothing. "Old man?" John asked, his voice growing softer, but with an underlying strength that couldn't be ignored. "You don't know who you're talking to." Clark laughed dismissively, thinking John was just some aging black man trying to assert some imaginary sense of importance. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Some veteran who thinks he's above the law, huh? Why don't you take your little truck and move it before things get real messy for you?" John could see it now. The officer wasn't just frustrated, he was disrespecting him, not because of the truck, but because of who he thought John was. Because he didn't think an old black man, in his faded jacket and boots, had the right to stand his ground. John let the silence hang for a long, uncomfortable moment. The young officer was still standing there, his arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. The weight of John's history seemed to fill the air between them. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, John reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered leather wallet. As he opened it, he glanced up at the officer, who still hadn't moved. Inside the wallet was a Medal of Honor, its gold ribbon catching the light in the morning sun. The officer didn't notice at first. He was too focused on the way he had been dominating the conversation. He had expected John to back down, to cower before his uniform. But when the officer finally saw the medal, his face changed. His smugness faltered. He blinked, and for the first time, something resembling uncertainty flashed across his face. He took a step back, staring at the medal, and then at John. His words suddenly caught in his throat. I didn't know, the officer stammered, his bravado slipping away. Yeah, John said, his voice now colder than before. I thought you might not. The officer swallowed hard, his confidence draining out of him. It wasn't just a medal, it was proof. It was validation of everything John had endured, not just in Vietnam, but here at home, in a world that still couldn't see his worth. Clark had tried to diminish him, but John had earned every inch of his space, and now the officer had to understand that. Clark opened his mouth to apologize, but before he could form the words, John stepped forward, his presence commanding the space. The power had shifted. John had reclaimed control. You see, officer, John said, his voice strong and clear, I fought for this country when I didn't have to. I earned my right to be treated with respect. Now you either learn how to show that respect, or you'll learn the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong person. The silence in the air was deafening. The officer's face turned pale as the realization of what he had just done settled in. The crowd around the gas station had been watching, and they were starting to murmur. The officer's mouth hung open as he fumbled for an excuse, but nothing came out. He was beaten, not by age, not by the medal, but by the undeniable truth of John's words. Move your car, Clark said weakly, his voice barely audible. He had lost all sense of power. The authority that had been so apparent moments ago was now completely gone. It was clear that this was not just a lesson in respect. It was a lesson in who holds real power. John gave him one last look before walking back to his truck, leaving the officer standing there, a shadow of his former self. But as John drove away from the gas station, little did he know that Officer Clark wasn't going to let this slide. The lesson had been learned, but it wouldn't be the last time John would find himself fighting for respect. A new battle was on the horizon, one that would test the limits of everything John had fought for. The morning sun had barely broken through the trees when John Walker turned onto the familiar street leading to his modest home. The dusty pickup truck rolled slowly over the cracked pavement, the engine humming softly beneath him. The events at the gas station felt like they had happened in another life, but John knew they weren't over. The officer, Ryan Clark, had been beaten, not just by the weight of John's words, but by the weight of history, a history Clark had been too blind to understand. But now, as John parked his truck and stepped onto his front porch, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The silence of the early morning was too peaceful, too calm. He had won a small battle, but the war wasn't over. John was halfway through his second cup of coffee when the phone rang. The landline echoed through the small kitchen, and for a moment he just stared at it, wondering if it was a mistake. He wasn't used to phone calls anymore, not from anyone who mattered, not since his wife had passed years ago. But there it was, that persistent ring. He picked it up. Hello? John's voice cracked slightly, betraying his calm facade. On the other end, the voice was young, crisp, but filled with a tone of urgency. Mr. Walker? The voice was unfamiliar. This is Detective Olivia Hayes with the Kingston Police Department. I need you to come down to the station. There's a situation you need to know about. A lump formed in John's throat. He didn't have to ask what it was. The warning bells went off instantly. What's this about, Detective? You'll understand when you get here, sir. Please, it's urgent. John knew he couldn't ignore it. He hadn't asked for this trouble, but it seemed that trouble was always following him. Vietnam, the streets. And now perhaps this officer's actions were about to bring something much darker to his doorstep. When John arrived at the station, the usual quiet hum of the place was gone. The officers at the front desk looked up nervously as he walked in. Detective Hayes stood in the doorway of the office, watching him with a solemn expression. Mr. Walker, she greeted him, motioning for him to follow her into the back. Please sit down. John settled into the chair, feeling the weight of the conversation already pressing on his chest. Hayes sat across from him, her eyes focused. but her demeanor professional, almost too formal for someone meeting a veteran. "We've been reviewing the situation with Officer Clark," she began, leaning forward slightly, "and we've uncovered something that doesn't sit well." John's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "It's about his report." Hayes's voice dropped, and she glanced toward the door, as if making sure no one could overhear. The internal investigation into Officer Clark's actions revealed discrepancies in his account of the gas station incident. His version doesn't add up. John furrowed his brow. "What are you saying? His report was a lie?" Detective Hayes paused for a moment. The tension in the room grew thick. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low. "Not just a lie, Mr. Walker. He fabricated the entire encounter." John felt a chill sweep over him. It didn't surprise him, but the sudden realization that he had been the victim of malicious deception hit hard. "He said what?" John's voice was barely above a whisper. "He told his superiors that you were belligerent, resisting, threatening to harm him." Hayes paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "And he claimed that you were the one who initiated the confrontation, that you challenged his authority first." The accusation hit John like a gut punch. He knew the officer had tried to belittle him, but to fabricate a story that made John out to be the aggressor? "I never laid a hand on him," John growled, his fist tightening. "I didn't even raise my voice. I stood my ground, but I didn't threaten him." Detective Hayes nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. "I know that, Mr. Walker. That's why we need you to come with us. This is about more than just a false report." John leaned forward, confusion settling in. "What are you talking about?" "We found something else," she said, pulling a folder from her desk. "Clark is connected to a group of officers in this town who have been under investigation for racial profiling. And now we've got evidence that he might be part of a larger scheme. Something much more dangerous." John stood, suddenly filled with a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. He wasn't just a veteran now. He was a witness, a fighter, a man who had earned the right to demand justice. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, the words coming out sharper than he intended. Detective Hayes stood up, walking toward him. "We need you to testify, Mr. Walker. This is bigger than you and me. Officer Clark's actions were only the beginning. If he's part of this group, we need to expose them. All of them." John nodded, the weight of his decision settling over him. He had seen darkness before, but this was something new. He couldn't walk away from it. Not now. "I'll testify." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "But I want Clark in front of a court. No more deals, no more slipping through the cracks. He gets what's coming to him." Just as John was about to walk out of the office with Hayes, the door swung open. Officer Clark stepped into the room, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. He wasn't in uniform. His hands were clenched by his sides, his eyes fixed on John. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Clark's voice was low, but it carried an unmistakable threat. John turned to face him, his chest swelling with confidence. "I'm doing what you couldn't, standing up for what's right." Clark's lips curled into a sneer. "You think this is over, old man? It's just beginning." John stood his ground, his voice firm. "You've messed with the wrong person, and now it's my turn to finish what you started." The room was charged with an electric tension, both men locked in a battle of wills. But just as Clark took a step forward, Hayes intervened, her hand raised to stop him. "It's over, Clark," she said firmly. "You're done." But as John and Hayes turned to leave, a loud crash echoed down the hall, followed by the screech of tires skidding across the pavement outside. Clark's backup was arriving, and they weren't here to protect him. John didn't know it yet, but the battle was about to escalate into something far bigger than he ever imagined. The tension in the room was unbearable as Officer Clark's backup stormed in. They were young, eager officers, probably rookies, their faces still flushed with the thrill of power. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. Detective Olivia Hayes quickly moved between John and the officers, her posture firm, but even she could sense that the power balance was shifting once again. Clark, still standing with clenched fists, shot a glance toward his team. His expression twisted in rage as he realized what was happening. The walls were closing in. "You think you can just walk away with all this?" Clark spat, his voice sharp. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with. I've got friends in high places, People who'll make sure you pay for this." John stood there, his back straight, unfazed by the threats. He had heard it all before. The empty promises, the hollow threats. He'd seen more dangerous men in Vietnam, and they hadn't scared him either. "I don't need to know your friends, Clark," John said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of service and sacrifice. "What I do know is you're about to lose everything." The two rookie officers looked uncertain, shifting their gazes between John and Clark. They were clearly intimidated by John's presence, by the strength he exuded, despite his age. Detective Hayes, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward. "You heard him, Officer Clark," she said, her voice steady. "This ends now. We've already contacted Internal Affairs. They've already seen the discrepancies in your report. We're filing the charges against you today. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not." Clark's face paled as the weight of Hayes' words sank in. He was no longer the one in control, and he knew it. John's eyes never left Clark's face, watching as the officer's bravado faltered. The rookies standing with Clark seemed to sense the shift in power too. They exchanged uncertain looks before one of them, a younger officer, spoke up. "Sir, maybe we should just let this go. We don't need to escalate this further." Clark whirled around, fury flashing across his face. "Are you telling me what to do?" But the young officer, hesitant and unsure, stood his ground. "No, sir, but maybe it's time we all stop. We don't need this kind of trouble. This is going too far." It was a powerful moment. The rookies, who had once followed Clark's every order without question, were now questioning their superior, seeing him for what he truly was. A man who had used his badge and position to intimidate others, to bully them into submission. John nodded slowly, his voice low but resolute. "I fought for this country. I fought for people like you, so you could have the freedom to make the right choice. Don't let fear guide your actions, son. Do what's right." The room was heavy with silence. It was clear that Clark's grip on his team was loosening, his influence waning. With a final, defeated look at John, Clark turned away, muttering under his breath. "You don't know what you're doing." Detective Hayes didn't flinch. "It's over, Clark. The truth always comes out in the end." Clark's jaw clenched as he stormed out of the room, his pride shattered. The officers who had followed him reluctantly remained behind, looking at John with new eyes. They weren't just rookies anymore. They were witnesses to the truth. John turned to Hayes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This wasn't just for me. It was for every man and woman who ever wore that uniform and didn't get the respect they deserved." "No," Hayes responded with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Walker, for standing up, for showing them the strength of your character, for reminding us all that heroes aren't defined by the medals they wear, but by the choices they make." As John left the police station, the weight of the day's events began to settle in. He had been underestimated, disrespected, and mistreated, but in the end, the truth had won. He had reminded them all that no one is above the law, and that integrity, respect, and honor were worth far more than any badge or title. But as John climbed into his truck and started the engine, his thoughts were already moving forward. The battle was won, but the fight was far from over. Would Clark pay for his actions? Would the other officers learn from this experience? John wasn't done yet. There was still more work to be done. For him, for his brothers and sisters who served, and for everyone who had ever been silenced by injustice. The story of John Walker teaches us that, in a world where power is often abused, where respect is often denied, we must remember that standing up for what's right is never easy. But it's always worth it. No matter how many times we are knocked down, no matter how many times others try to silence us, our strength lies in our ability to stand up for what is right. Will you stand up when it matters most, or will you stay silent? John Walker didn't just stand up for himself. He stood up for everyone who's ever been looked down on, dismissed, or disrespected. He showed the world that true heroes don't wear capes. They wear integrity and courage. What would you have done in John's position? Would you have had the courage to face down Officer Clark's abuse of power, or would you have walked away? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that empower and inspire. Together we can make sure that justice isn't just an idea, it's a reality.